News is designed to keep you small. Iran, the pandemic, the Great Recession, 9/11. If you waited for the news to give you permission to be successful, you'd still be waiting. I stopped managing my life based on the headlines and started managing it based on a 10x vision, and it changed everything. Um, Welcome today. I appreciate you taking some time to kind of set aside, or I guess, I don't know, you're probably driving or probably hanging out in the gym or something like that. I wanted to go ahead and share a few different points with you today, and this is the first segment, but I I even asked Chat GPT or Gemini or whoever, anyway, what they thought I should talk about first. There's a number of different things I'd like to talk about, and this one surprisingly was listed as the one I should talk about first. And so I'm going to go ahead and talk. Um, if anybody's dialing in on this video timely, right now as I'm recording this, the U.S. has attacked Iran, and there's a lot of news. It's a lot of turmoil that's being created. I should say Israel attacked, and U.S. is definitely doing it also. Anyway, there's been a lot of inflation fears. There's been the Strait of Hormuz and things like that that have all been front and center. And our fears of inflation have gone up. Our actual inflation has not gone up other than our gas prices so far, but it will trickle through the economy if it lasts long enough. And of course, when people hear that, it kind of freaks them out a little bit. Things are already expensive enough. In 2026, the average American, there, I think it's 40% of people in the United States that have credit cards cannot pay them off each month. Um, and that equates to the total of the all-time highest balances, cumulative balances on credit cards across the country. And so when I think people hear this kind of stuff, that's very concerning to them. But as I've thought about preparing for this video and what I wanted to share today, there was like nothing in my mind to talk about news and my perspective on news. And I asked myself why that was. And why is it that I don't have an opinion about all this stuff that's going on? I'm pretty opinionated generally. And I just thought about it and I was like, well, that's because I've been listening to this book. And this book has been totally eclipsing all my attitudes and ideas. And it's been very inspiring to me. And then I realized, uh-huh. So I'm actually going to talk about the book a little bit. But also, I just thought, gosh, Josh Thomas is definitely famous for not watching the news. My mom and my stepdad are regularly talking to me and asking me if I knew about this or that. And frankly, they're oftentimes my informant. Um, I do keep in touch with a lot of news, but not near the level that a lot of other people feel. Um, and I love what AI drew up for me here. Uh, let's see. Da, 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 da. Well, I'm going to talk about 10x, but that doesn't necessarily. It's if you focus on your own life and your own goals, it requires you to ignore 80% of the noise, which frankly is the news, and focus on the 20% that you can do. And so, little background, bouncing around a little bit. Hopefully, this is okay, but I think you'll find this really interesting. Um, So I ignore a ton of the news. I spend very little time looking at the news. But when I do look at the news, I'm often trying to skirt back and forth from channels because I know Fox is very leaning heavy towards Trump and what is it, MSNBC and I think it's CNN. Anyway, there's several that have there. It's blatantly obvious that there's Trump supporters and others that they're Trump haters and I just feel like I get a more rounded viewpoint. So when I am looking at news, I am looking at across the channels to try to hear kind of both sides of the story. Um, but that's about it. And I don't tend to spend tons of time, and I don't always do in there. I do dial into the economic news a lot. But let me tell you what I do focus on. So this book is an example of an attitude that I feel like is really useful. So the name of the book that I've been listening to is called 10x is Easier Than 2x. And I should tell you the name of the author, but I can't. Benjamin something, smart guy, great writer. But I've been listening to the book, and so I've been listening to him and Dan Sullivan do all the speaking. And honestly, their principles, what they have prepared. So Dan Sullivan, I guess, is he the master owner or whatever of president, CEO, or whatever of strategic coaching, I think it might be. And he's been coaching tens of thousands of people for, I think he said 25 years or something like that. But the principles that they address in this book are really, really cool. I will fair warn you that if you're listening to this and you're thinking, "Oh, I'm going to go check out that book," I would say if you are not an entrepreneur, if you are not self-employed, if you are not largely in control of your day to day, you're probably not going to get much out of that book. If you're a regular employee, if you're even a manager. I just don't think that book's going to offer as much inspiration to you as it would. It's definitely for entrepreneurs. And that's definitely something I'm going to get into next, actually. In fact, what I'm going to get into next is, but most people think that banks' rules are written in stone, and they aren't. They're written for people who don't know how to push back. Banks' rules are not written in stone. They're written for people who don't know how to push back. I just rescued a loan for a brilliant startup founder, and the bank's own expert was requiring stuff that they didn't frankly need. Anyway, I'll get into that after this. But in the 10x world, so the premise of this book is that as a business coach, they're talking to their entrepreneurs and they're asking them, hey, what would 10x look like to you? What would 2x look like to you? And they're typically talking 2x, two times, two times their income is where most people default. But it could be two times your skill. It could be two times if you're an athlete, right? Your two times your accomplishments, two times your impact if you're, Mr. Beast on YouTube or whatever. Just how do you get to 2x, whatever 2x looks like to you? And they go on and they talk about how most people have several paths that get them to 2x. However, almost across the board, 2x usually is just rolling up your sleeves and doing more, working harder, working longer. That's typically the path to 2x. But then they ask the question, what does 10x look like? How would you get to 10x if you were to 10x your income? Or if you were going to 10x your influence or your impact or whatever you're doing. And in most cases, people are like, uh, what's 10x look like? I don't even know how to get there. I couldn't even begin to, and I was the same way. I was thinking, simply put, like size of company or income, and frankly, I don't really know what the path to get there would look like. So that was pretty interesting and kind of make you scratch your head a little bit, like, geez, what would it look like? And then they kind of go on, and there's just a few principles from the book I just wanted to highlight because this is what's been on my mind. Iran has not been on my mind. Have interest rates gone up a little bit since Iran started? Yes. I'm also going to address that here in just a few minutes. But why hasn't that been on my mind? And so that's why I'm elaborating. That's why I'm talking a little bit about this. This book is just because this is what's been on my mind. This has been inspirational to me. This has been exciting and energizing. And frankly, Iran wouldn't be. And so, um, okay, so I'm going to continue. So let's see if I can remember all the principles of the book that really jumped out at me. They have several mic dropped principles that I just thought were pretty awesome. So as you're thinking about this path to 10x, what does 10x look like? So they're arguing that 10x is easier than 2x. Easier. How is that possible? So number one, he's saying that you can't get there alone. So they are not shy at all about saying that you need help to get there. They have this principle they call in this book, and they've actually written a whole book called It's Who, Not How. They are very not shy about you needing to hire assistants. You need partners to get where you need to go. Not AI. This book was written just 3 years ago. And frankly, I feel like they could have easily mentioned AI. Now, granted, that's just on the eve of where GPT really broke out. But they didn't talk about AI. They didn't talk about virtual assistants. They talked about who, not how. Who do you need in your life to help you get to 10x? And the reason that they asked that question is because they said, if you look at your every single day, all day long activities, your personal life, your business life, everything in between, if you look at all of your activities, 80% of those activities are yielding 20% of the results, the Pareto principle. 20% of those activities are yielding 80% of the results. And I think most people can recognize that. And maybe it's not 100% 20/80, but what they're saying is what you need to do is take all that 80% and get it out of your life. You need somebody to help you do that 80%. And probably you need to get somebody that's going to be better at it than you were anyway. But even if they're not, even if they're just as good or close to as good, you need it out of your life so that you can focus on the 20%. And as you focus on the 20% and you expand your 20% to 100% of your time, you're going to find that you're a lot better at what you're better at. And you're going to get even better. And then sometime down the road, maybe you 10x again and you dial in from that 20% to 20% of that. And again, you offload the other 80% to some other some other person, right? And they just talked about business owners that have done that and the impact that it's had. And I've thought about, if you look at a lot of, offices, doctor's offices, dentist office, if you look at athletes, it is amazing how much they really, really focus on their 20%, right? The performers in this world. Like when was the last time we went to the doctor's office and talked to the doctor at the front desk, right? Never. But how would the doctor be able to run their office without everybody that's around them, right? Or the dentist, right? Could they? I mean, honestly, they'd probably be not very good at it, right? Because they don't know all the cute, cool systems that are used to help schedule everybody and remind us of our appointments and stuff, or help process our paperwork or whatever. So, and frankly, we don't want them to be good at it. We want them to be good at healing us or fixing our teeth or performing if they're in a game or Hamilton. You think about that was a cool musical. Those people were crazy talented. The person that wrote that, crazy talented. But you look behind the scenes, and I don't know this factually. I don't know what I'm talking about, but I can only assume at least as many people were behind the curtain as there were in front of the curtain. And I would bet that there's probably closer to 3 or 4 times the people behind the curtain, including all of the marketing and advertising and all the stuff that happened to get people in the seats to watch that. Um, anyway. So 80% of the efforts that we're involved in, we need to get those off of us and have somebody else do those while we focus on the 20. And that's going to be one of the main principles to helping us 10x, right? And get really, really good. So that was one of the main principles, who, not how, focusing on the 20, not the 100%. And then there was another good one in there. I'm kind of forgetting it at the moment. I actually just touched on it and kind of went away. So whatever. Anyway, this isn't a book report. I just wanted to kind of share why I'm not focused on Iran right now. And I thought, I know a lot of people are really dialed in and they read all the time. And I just think it's not necessary to do that. You become an expert on the news, and I think you're going to be pretty downhearted, frankly. So anyway, let's go ahead and move on to the next segment. I talked about this. Most people think that the bank's rules are written in stone, and that but they aren't. They simply aren't. They're written for people who don't know how to push back. We did just close and rescue a loan for a founder of a startup. Um, I think his story is really interesting. So, anybody listening to this, are you a founder? Anybody listening to this know somebody who founded a business? Utah is the second best state in the union, it says, for startups. Welcome to Utah, business mecca. Whew, that's pretty awesome. And believe me, I know a ton of people, and frankly, I'm relatively self-employed also. So um, mine's interesting, but that's not that interesting to share it here. I also found this interesting. The average startup in Utah has 3.6 employees. That is a lean, mean business machine. Holy cow. And then the typical what was it? The typical startup venture capitalism uh, often funds a lot of these startups. The typical venture capital started or for startups around here is less than 5 million. So there are a lot of those big companies and big businesses that are doing way bigger numbers than that, but most startups are under 5 million, and they start with 3.6 employees. So pretty cool. Um, but I want to tell you a little bit about this guy. So he started a company. a couple years ago. Pretty cool company. I am not going to talk about what he started just because I find it interesting, but number one, I don't want to identify him too much. Wouldn't want to embarrass him, and I don't have his permission to do that. And maybe he'd grant it. He probably would, but I just wouldn't want to do that without his permission since I haven't got it. But his was an interesting story because we submitted his loan to the bank, and the bank says, "Hey, we want 2 years of tax returns." Now, it's important for you to understand for this context that in my world, in the mortgage world, if you own 25% or more of any business, we have to get business tax returns. We need to see the business stability. And that's exactly what this underwriter asked for. But in our case, he did not own 25%. He owned less than 25%. And to make it more tricky, it changed in the middle. So at the beginning of things, he owned, it was actually shoot, now I'm forgetting. It might have actually been over 25% in the beginning. And then in the end, it was no longer over 25%. It went down, but I can't remember for sure if he was over 25 in the beginning or the end or ever, or if he was 20% and then went down. But in any case, it doesn't really matter too much because what matters is where he's at. So this is the point of this story. So this client, he applies with us, great credit, great everything, looking to buy his house, his own personal house, and the bank asks for the business tax returns. Now, guys, I've been doing this for long enough, and I've met a lot of loan officers out there. I am going to tell you, first off, a lot of loan officers don't know what the actual rules are. There are 5 agencies. These agencies, you've heard of them: FHA, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, VA, and USDA. These 5 agencies write the rules. Now, a bank can require anything extra that they want because it's their money, but it's these agencies' rules that actually matter because if a bank is saying, "Oh, we're going to override these rules," then just go to another bank. It's not that hard, right? Just go somewhere else. And as a mortgage broker, that's what we do, right? But these 5 agencies only require business tax returns when they own more than 25% of the business. In this particular case, he owned less than 25% of the business. So when the bank underwriter came back and said, "Hey, I want the tax returns," I said, "No, you don't get them." And this is an important thing because had they looked at them, these are startups. This is a startup, right? These are tax returns that are showing a loss every year. I think they say it's 50%, 50%. Oh, so what is it? Where did it go? Yeah, it's something like 50% of businesses started, or let's see, 20% fail in the first year. That's because they're not making money, right? And then 50% fail by year 5. So 1 and 2 actually survive after 5 years. But that means that a lot of these startups are showing a loss on the business. And so if I have to provide business tax returns, it's not going to go anywhere, not that way anyway. In this particular client's case, it definitely showed a loss. So when the underwriter said, "Hey, I want these tax returns," I said, you ain't getting them. And that underwriter kind of dug in their heels, which that's pretty normal for underwriters. They like to be the boss. Well, I also dug in my heels and I escalated. We went to management. And I think we escalated at 4 or 5 levels of management before we finally got somebody to override it. They did override it. Rules do not require it. And we were able to successfully close that loan without too much drama. So, yeah, in the end, we got the client what the client wanted. But it's important to learn, recognize that sometimes the people think that banks' rules are written in stone. I've made my career on them being able to be changed. So, all right. I promised I would talk about interest rates a little bit, or more specifically, what rates are doing and stuff like that. I am going to get to that, but first, here's another one. Most investors are equity rich and cash poor. They're focused on the wrong number. If the property isn't putting money in your pocket every month, it's not an investment, it's a second job. So let me read that again. Most investors are equity rich and cash poor. They're focused on the wrong number. If your property isn't putting money in your pocket every month, it's not an investment. It's a second job. I would say it's a hobby and an expensive one, quite possibly. And if it's not an enjoyable hobby, then why are you doing it? Um, So the reason I am bringing this up is because I wanted to share this screen. So let me get my screen share going on. So this is, we're running numbers last week with a client who wants to buy an investment property. This is the price of their investment property. As soon as I can find my mouse again. Well, maybe. I don't know what recording looks like when my screen freezes. So I'm going to keep talking. We'll have to see. But top left corner, you can see a $393,000 purchase price. Um, yeah. Well, if you're still listening to this, I have no idea to know if this is freezing or not. So it looks frozen to my side. And that'll be a bummer because I've already recorded so much. I'm just going to keep talking and see what happens. But yep, top corner, 393. That's the purchase price that they're looking at. Okay, welcome back. I'm no longer frozen. I don't know if that was locked up for you listening to this or what it was like, but it was locked up on my side. So one last thing, one last time, the purchase price 393. This is the price of the investment property we were looking at with a client last week. Now, the highlighted one that you can see, this is what they were wanting, 30-year fixed. Now, they canceled their contract, which is interesting. And I think it's an important, this is the whole reason I'm sharing this is because they're focused on the wrong thing. They could actually do pretty good, but they're focused on the wrong thing. They're new investors. They don't have the experience to know this better. I've tried to help them, but they just don't see it. So what I'm looking at is 2253 a month. That's what matters to me. The rent on this particular property is going to be minimum 1500, but probably maximum 2000. So 2000 a month is not much. That's a negative cash flow, obviously. You can see that if you pay 2253 a month and you owe 2000 or you receive 2000, you're going to be in the hole. But it's actually worse than what you're thinking because remember, there's going to be expenses. There's going to be unforeseen expenses. There's going to be repairs. There's going to be vacancies. There's going to be things. So you need to actually basically write off some of that 2000. If you're going to collect 2000, again, going to the five agencies, right? FHA, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, VA, USDA, what they're looking at is a 25% rule. Well, we call it the 75% rule. We count 75% of the rent. So if you're collecting 2000, then we're only actually giving you credit for 1500, right? So if you use that rule when you're buying property as an investor, you should be quite safe. In my experience, older properties tend to be closer to that 75% rule. Newer properties, especially with HOAs, tend to be a little bit less than that, closer to maybe 85, 90%. But in this case, if you can see their $2,200 payment, if they're only actually getting 1500, that's a $750 loss. Now, before we go too much detail on these other loans, I want to show this one. This monthly payment is $400 cheaper. Now, this is definitely still upside down if you're only keeping 1500. But if it is a newer property with an HOA or whatever, this one does not have an HOA, by the way. But if it is a newer property, that's very possibly a breaking even point for you. And Anyway, so part one of my points here is you got to notice the cash flow. You need to have good cash flow, or your startup, right? Your new rental property is going to go in the hole, right? And you can only go in the hole for so long before you either need cash infusion, aka somebody to invest with you, or two, you go bankrupt, right? You close the doors, and we don't want a rental property to go bankrupt, so to speak. Now, every one of my properties that I bought, when I bought them, every one of them was upside down. And I've been very happy with all of my rental properties. Okay, let me let me restate that. I have been very happy with the final results of all of my rental properties. There's been many days that I haven't been super happy about having those rental properties or having those experiences. It's just like having another job. It's not always beautiful. But in this particular case, going back to the cash flow, I would have chosen this one on the far right. Now, let's talk about some of the loan details. So what these ones mean, so DSCR, that's just the name of the loan type. It literally is no tax returns. It is strictly built on the cash flow of the property. So we're only looking at FICO score, down payment, and cash flow of property, which means we're looking at the rent on the property. We're calculating the rent and we're counting the rent as compared to this payment. Okay. So that's what the program means. But that IO or 10, whatever, that IO means interest only. So this is why these clients didn't like this, is they felt bad about the loan not making any payments. Now this is a 40-year loan. And so this loan type is actually a 40-year loan. So for 10 years, it's interest only. So that 1858 is pretty well locked in for a decade. Now, and then it goes to an interest only. So a decade of 1858, and then it goes to a fully amortized 30 year. So then it's going to look a little bit like this for the following 30 years. Okay. Now, I told you every one of my rental properties that I bought with a negative cash flow, and I was happy with it. But over the subsequent years, rent went up, and as a result, I was able to then stop losing money every month and start actually breaking even and then eventually actually making money. And every one of mine, when I bought it with a extra cash infusion, if you will, where I knew how much I was going to be upside down and I budgeted for that. And besides the money down, I set some more money aside to basically cover that negative cash flow for the number of years that I thought I needed to have negative cash flow. That way, my property was fully self-sustainable. And every one of my properties, I have my most recent one is still cash flow negative. The one before that, no, it's cash flow positive for sure. So all of my properties have reached a point of cash flow positive, minus the last one. It's still negative. But it's also gone up probably $600 a month since I started renting it. So it's only a matter of time till it goes positive. But all of them across the board, even in the very first year, between the tax savings that comes with having a rental property, between the amortization, because these monthly payments, not the 1858, but the 2253, that's going to include probably $400 a month of loan repayment and the appreciation. All three of those factors have made it so that every one of my properties, net net, is actually making money every month versus losing money. Okay. So that's an important feature to make sure that, investors are looking at, paying attention to. I didn't have this option when I bought my last rental property. Otherwise, I definitely would have used it. But yeah, 1858, $400 a month cheaper than that one. I would have used this program hands down in a heartbeat. See the interest rate? Same interest rate. See the loan points to get there? Same points. So there's your actual closing cost. So you can see that this one actually has slightly lower closing costs. Now, to just to be full disclosure here, this particular loan does have a 3-year prepayment penalty on it, which did make the interest rate and closing costs better. But a 3-year interest, I mean, when I buy my rental properties, I'm not buying them to flip them. So a 3-year prepayment penalty for me is no big deal. I'm happy to do that. And this particular investor wasn't going to be any different. So we quoted for a 3-year prepayment penalty as well. But notice that it's the same interest rate, same closing costs. They can pay the principal anytime they want. They don't have to pay the interest only, but that's all they are obligated to pay is the interest only. So I would have chosen that loan hands down. Now, one other point, this one's 25% down, this one's 20. That's why you have 98,000 versus 80,000 is money due at closing. So that was a key component because you can see right next door to it is another exact same loan, 20% down, but you can see the rate slightly higher because it is 20% down. So I would have done this one just to get a slightly better interest rate. And well, I don't know, maybe I have to think about that one because I am kind of one of keeping as much cash in my hand as possible. So I might have actually done this one. Anyway, so when you're an investor, pay attention to your cash flow. Cash flow is most important. Paying off the debt's not most important. Nothing else is most important. Cash flow is most important, and you need reserves. So let's go ahead and wrap up that segment and get into another one. So I got a few today. All right, here we go. So, in the financial world, good is a temporary state of rates, state of being. Good is a temporary state of being in the financial world. Rates don't stay at the bottom, they visit the bottom. And if you aren't ready to move when the window opens, you'll be stuck outside when it slams shut. So in the financial world, good is relative, right? It changes. Interest rates went down to the lowest spot that they visited last, what has it been now? September. They hit the lowest spot that they'd been at. Only one other time they'd been that low in the last 4 years, right? So September rates went down. Now, a year ago, October 2020 or September, August 2024, rates went down, hung out there for about 3 weeks, and then they went up. But this last year, 2025, in September, they went down to that same level. And I was a little surprised by how few people were motivated by that. And then they stayed there. And then it seemed like it had the opposite effect of people's motivation is people weren't seizing the moment. And so fast forward to December, January, February, we're seeing actual interest rates actually had creeped even slightly lower than that in where are we now? End of March, so it's the beginning of March. Rates had actually slipped down. So right the Friday before the U.S. attacked Iran, we recorded the best rates that we'd seen in the previous 4 years. So that was a great moment. That was a wonderful moment. Then, of course, Iran thing begins, and all the fears for oil and costs of oil and everything start going up. And the more inflation is an arch enemy to bonds, to any long-term investment, and bonds and mortgages are long-term investments. And so, immediately the bond prices started actually falling, which drove interest rates up. And so I've been telling people for 5 months, don't get caught. Don't let these rates lull you to sleep. Go back and watch some of my previous videos. Don't let the low rates lull you to sleep. But some people did. And now some people are calling me asking about these opportunities. Guys, rates are still good, but they're not as good. And maybe they will be in the subsequent weeks if Iran thing kind of starts to get more predictable. But just recognize that the rates move in a range. They made it down to in the 5.9-ish. Now they're hanging out, closer to the 6.3-ish. They're still really, really good. That's still 0.5% better than they were last summer. So don't miss out. Things are still great, but there are moments where they dip down. Be ready to take advantage of those. If you're shopping for a house, you can't really rate shop. So just buy whenever the rates are, the rates are. And then when the rates dip, we'll get you a refinance. That's the magic ingredient, okay? So that's about all I was going to say about that. That Iran, yes, that could be a little on the depressing side because I like good rates. The better the rates, the easier the sale, right? Everybody calls me up and I'm everybody's hero when rates are low. And so that's always fun being everybody loving us. But when rates go up, nobody likes me. I'm the enemy. I'm like, ugh, people just don't, they're just not fans. So I definitely like rates being lower, but you just got to recognize this kind of going all the way back to the first thing I said. Control what you can control, and you can't control rates, right? Focus on finding your own inspiration, reading your own stuff that's going to make your life better. Focus on being the best you, so doing the 20% that only you can do and 10xing your life. And when the moments come, you've got me in your life. I'll let you know when rates are better and we'll get you a refinance and you'll be happy. Okay. So I'm going to wrap up. That is almost my last message for today. So I want to wrap up with kind of just a little bit more of that kumbaya feeling. So there's a quote. I actually just read it yesterday for like the 80th time. It's a quote that I have recurring on my phone because it pops up. I have it popping up over and over because I just love it. I want it to be kind of ingrained in who I am. So, and please forgive me if, well, you'll see why here in just a second. So, peace, let's see, how does it go? Peace is not the absence of trouble. Peace is not the absence of trouble. It's the presence of Christ. Okay, that's why I said, please forgive me. Keep listening though. For anybody that's not religious and don't like that or don't want to hear about it, just give me a second. Just give me a second. I promise I'm not going to be too preachy here. Remember, I grew up outside the church as well. I didn't go to any church until I was 18 years old. That was the first time I stepped foot in a church in my entire life that I'm aware of. Um, but uh, why Christ? Why is the peace, the presence of Christ? Um, and why am I talking about it in connection to all this stuff? So peace is not the absence of trouble. Okay. It's the presence of Christ. Why? How does Christ bring us peace when other things are going wrong? Rates are going up. How does Christ, what does he have to do with me? Right? And the interest rates going up. None of my clients are calling me up. Why would he be bringing me peace? Or people are freaked out about Iran and honestly, creating more terrorism because there's some a bunch of extremists over there that want to, come and attack or something like that. A lot of fear can come out of stuff like that. Or maybe it's pandemic, right? That had all kinds of fear and uncertainty, or maybe it's the Great Recession or 9/11 all over again, right? There's a lot of times when we can have a lot of trouble. Maybe I lost my job. Maybe I can't find a job. Um, Man, a client of mine, we just talked to him a little while ago, lost his job because and that's not bad enough, right? After losing his job, um, I guess his ex got pretty vocal and sent DCFS, and DCFS didn't actually find any reasons wrong, but then suddenly they found something wrong, and he ends up losing his kids for a time period, and just kind of fighting that. And the kids weren't placed with any family members; they were placed in the foster care system, even though he's got family members around that they could have gone to. Really, really messed up story. Well, that guy's got a lot of trouble in his life, right? How can he find peace? And why would Christ have anything to do with that? And so Christ teaches a lot of things, but for me personally, part of what I love is number one, I read the scriptures. I read the scriptures to learn. There's a lot of true stories in the scriptures. Um, I know some scriptures may be arguable about that, but a lot of them are nobody argues about them, whether or not they're true. There's a lot of true stories that teach you a lot of history, just factual, what happened to what people and how they dealt with it. So that brings a lot of hands-on ideas on how I can sort out my problems. Number two, I feel the Holy Ghost when I read the scriptures. And the Holy Ghost, the feelings of the Holy Ghost are love, joy, peace, long-suffering, gentleness, meekness. These feelings make me feel good, including peace, right? So just reading them makes these feelings come to me. And when I'm scared, or should be, and I feel these feelings, well, I don't feel fear anymore. I feel better. And so, going back to the saying, peace is not the absence of trouble, but it's the presence of Christ. What can we do to bring Christ into our life? Well, okay, I don't believe in Christ. Now what? What am I going to, how does this apply to me? What does Christ stand for to people like me? Christ stands for somebody who's kind to others, who looks out and serves others, looks out for and serves others. Christ was one who tried to heal people. Christ usually did everything he did for free, right? Um, he called people out when they were doing things wrong. He tried to teach the truth that he knew was right, right? So church leaders that were kind of what's the word, prosecute or persecuting other people for their poverty. Um, why would a church leader ever persecute anybody for their poverty? But there were church leaders in his time that were persecuting people for their poverty or their nationality or things like that. Well, he stood up and he called those church leaders out, right? So maybe I don't believe in Christ, but maybe I believe in some of those same values. And so why don't I walk in those same footsteps? Why don't I go about doing good, trying to heal the sick, trying to, help teach truth and trying to free the captive, if you will, those that are bound in addiction or bound in poverty or bound in whatever addictions and stuff, try to help people. And for sure, I think everybody can relate to this point that the more you focus on helping others, the more you think about their problems, the more your problems disappear. And that's something my mom taught me a long time ago, and a lot of other great people in my life. Um, I always joked around that my mom taught me all of the commandments. And then when I joined the church, I understood the why behind the commandments. And so thanks, Mom. Appreciate you being there for me. Anyway, that's it. I want to wrap up with that. If you're feeling stress or peace, or excuse me, stress or worry or trouble or anxiety, try making sure that you have Christ in your life in as much as it's possible. And frankly, if you don't believe in Christ, I still invite you. Feel free to reach out and argue with me if you want. Um, but I just believe that he really is there. And I believe that people can find him. And when he really is in your life, peace really does reign. But if nothing else you got out of this video, 10x is easier than 2x. What a great book. I've enjoyed it way more than reading the news. I love being able to know that banks do not make their rules are not in stone. The agency's rules are pretty much in stone for the record, but the bank's rules are not. I love focusing on the cash flow for my investments, making sure that I pay attention to whatever it takes to get that cash flow. And then I just don't worry about well, that was weird. I just don't worry about the rates and stuff. I just try to live my own life doing the what I know is gonna get me where I gotta go. So with that, hope you have a great rest of your day. Thanks for joining me for this extended uh, video. Talk to you soon.